All right. Well,
And you gonna drink a beer with us or not?
Let me go get one.
awesome.
Awesome. All right, another corrupted individual.
On the flight deck, crews are now manning for the next launch. It's time to clear the flight deck and catwalks. Stand well clear of all jet blasts, prop arcs, and exhaust. It's time to start up the Go aircraft. Let's start them up.
Hi, I'm Dave Baronic, callsign Bio. I was an F-14 Rio and a Top Gun instructor, and I'm one of your hosts for the F-14 Tomcast. The F-14's first combat missions in the air-to-ground role took place in Kosovo in 1999 during Operation Allied Force. It was a complex environment for all aviators, as we will soon learn.
And I'm Craig Snyder, callsign Crunch, and I was an F-14 pilot and Top Gun instructor as well, and I'm your other host here on the F-14 Tomcast. Our guest today is retired Navy Rear Admiral Dell Snapper Bull, and Snapper was a Rio and VF-14 deployed on the USS Theodore Roosevelt, and he flew in these challenging skies over Kosovo. So Snapper, welcome, sir, to the F-14 Tomcast.
Crunch Bio, it is absolutely my pleasure and honor to participate in this conversation and to see you both again, because and I appreciate what you're both doing to keep the F-14 alive. It truly was an honor, as the three of us know, to be able to fly that airplane and particularly work with, most of the time, for the young men and women that kept that thing flying, our maintainers, our troops. That had just as much or more pride in that airplane than we did. So thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, it's great having you here, and thanks for the kind words. And as always, also big thanks to all our listeners out there, because they're the ones that they help make this possible. So we're here. We are. We're going to talk with you today about primarily the Tomcat as it applied to the Kosovo conflict back in 1999. But before that, let's set the groundwork, set the background, the history for everybody. Can you give us a little bit about you? Where are you from? How you got commissioned? How you got into naval aviation? And most importantly, how'd you get into the F-14?
Sure, happy to. And it's a bit of a long story, and I'll try to summarize as much as I can. I was born and raised in Whidbey Island, Washington State, where I met my bride, my high school sweetheart of 33 years now. We had 4 children. My oldest son is a Navy engineer and a diver. My number 2 son flies F-18 Super Hornets and just left the Top Hatters, ironically enough, and now he's an instructor in the RAG as of last month. My princess, my daughter, our only daughter, she married Hi-Fi Harris's son, if you guys recall, Admiral Harris and Connor, and they are both stationed at Whidbey Island flying Growlers. And then my youngest son, Jagger, is graduating here in May at Rice University, where he's tight end for them on scholarship for the last 5 years. Just flew into the transfer portal because he had a COVID year, and he got picked up by Wake Forest. So he's going to play a year, get his master's playing for Wake Forest. So we're proud and excited. Whether he's going to go into the Navy or not, we'll see. So I was raised in a naval aviation family. Growing up in the family, my brother Bruce, who also flew the A6 Intruder and then the Hornet, we wouldn't tell people who our dad was because we wanted to get there on our own. My dad was a retired admiral, had 7 commands, flew the A6 Intruder most of his career. In fact, he was awarded the Navy Cross for a single plane strike into Hanoi during Vietnam, 3 tours in Vietnam. And in fact, if you've ever seen the movie Flight of the Intruder, William Dafoe played my father. That was a bit of a Hollywood makeup of that mission, single plane strike. And my dad didn't die in like he did in the movie, but very proud of my dad. He passed away 3 years ago, and I wanted to fly the A6 Intruder like my dad. So I I played football at University of Idaho, graduated with a computer science degree, always wanting to fly in the Navy. I went to ROTC at the university and got into flight school and selected the A6 Intruder. So my dream was fulfilled by flying the Intruder, I thought. They retired the airplane 5 years after I started flying it. And so those of us that were fortunate enough to have an option to go fly something else, I chose the F-14. They asked for your top three choices, and I told them the F-14. My second choice was the A6, and I didn't give them a third choice, meaning either you're going to let me fly the F-14 or I'm getting out of the Navy. Thank goodness I selected to fly the F-14. I went to the RAG, which is the training squadron in Virginia Beach, and then went to VF-24 back in Miramar. I did one deployment with VF-24, and then they sent me right back to the RAG to be an F-14 instructor. So I instructed in both the A, B, and D models, which was fun. But I'm predominantly, most of my hours are in the F-14A, which is what we were flying in Kosovo. When I left to be from my instructor tour, that's when I ended up over with the top hatters at VF-14. And the CO and the XO at the time were Slapshot Carter and Slammer Richardson.
And of course, Slammer we had on the show, I think that was episode 2, if memory serves.
Yeah, one of those.
Yeah, what a great episode that was. Well, sure, episode 4, 17.
So I did watch that episode, and evidently I think more of Slammer than he thinks of me, because he never mentioned my name, so I must have had a great impact on him. He was my pilot, you know. A lot of the missions he was talking about, I was in his back seat. He never mentioned me, so I'll get even.
Oh,
all right. So,
okay. So, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, Crunch. You're on a roll.
Oh, I was just going to say. So you were you went to the RAG as a student, VF-24 out at Miramar, did a deployment, I think, and then back to a RAG instructor. That's where you and I met. And then after that, you went to the lids at VF-14. Which takes us up to present day of this one right here. Is that right? Of our discussion.
That's correct.
Now, after that, just for everybody, I mean, at some point you became a rear admiral. You probably did something else. You want to just give us the overview, what happened afterwards?
Sure. Real quick. After that deployment, I went to Capitol Hill, kicking and screaming, and I was Senator McCain's defense advisor, Navy fellow for a year. And once you get that kind of stink on your hand, once you understand how the Hill works, I went, 9/11 happened. In fact, I was standing next to Senator McCain as we were watching the Pentagon burning before we got him in a car and got him out of there. And then I left that job and I went to my first joint job in the Pentagon, ironically, and I was the anti-terrorism force protection policy person on the joint staff. Left there, and I selected for my first command, and it was interesting as the bureau called and they said, "Hey, what squadron would you like?" And I said, "What do you mean? I'd be happy to have a T-34 squadron." I didn't know I had a choice, and they said, "Well, the F-14 is being replaced by the Super Hornet. Do you want an F-14 squadron or do you want a Super Hornet squadron? We'll start there." And I thought about it, and deep in my heart, I wanted the new thing, true, but I also wanted to be able to say I was commanding officer like bio of an F-14 squadron. So my answer to the bureau was, I'll take an F-14 squadron as long as I can deploy with them. What I don't want to do is get an F-14 squadron and then transition into Super Hornets. So I'm really a class leader and I'm not really a warfighting, commanding officer. So they couldn't do that. So I took the Black Aces out of Lemoore, and it was my first command Super Hornet squadron. Back then, the Black Aces just got Lot 26 Super Hornets. Advanced crew station, for those in the audience, what that means is the front seat, and this comes into play because it's very unlike the F-14. The front seat was separated from the back seat in that the pilot could do, say, air to air,
Oh yeah.
and the Wizzo could do air to ground and vice versa, especially when we got the ISA radar in the aircraft. You could do it at the same time. The radar is so amazing.
Snapper, that's a great, very concise explanation of what that means. That's good.
Yeah,
Thanks.
excellent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now you didn't hit Lot 26. If memory serves, Lot 28 was the first AESA radar. Is that right?
Right.
Okay,
Right.
got it.
Right.
So you had a standard. It was that APG 60 or APG 70.
71.
71. Thank
Yeah.
you. Woo.
Yeah. Yep.
Golly, I
Yeah.
almost pulled it out, but I was afraid to sound
Yeah.
stupid, and I didn't do
Good,
it.
good memory. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So Dave Fravor was my CO, another A6 guy, former A6 guy. So we got along swimmingly. Still one of my best friends today. I left that job and I went back to another joint job, and then I picked up a bonus command. So I had VFA 122, and that was the Super Hornet training squadron. The unique part about that time is VFA 125, which was the legacy Hornet squadron, training squadron. The Navy decided to combine them. So we combined that squadron. VFA 122 at the time was 113 Hornets and about 3,000 people. It was the largest squadron on the planet that we know of. In fact,
wow.
Ernie Spence was my XO and Deedle Duff, and one of them walked in and said, "Hey, Skipper, do you know that there's only 10 other air forces on this planet that are bigger than your squadron?" So, yeah, so
that's good.
That was pretty cool. I left there, and then I selected to be an Air Wing commander. So I had Air Wing 9. When I finished up a couple cruises, back-to-back cruises, 2 8-month cruises with 5 months in between, and just couldn't have had better leaders and sailors in that Air Wing. It's just a great memory. Did some great work in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And after that job, I went to be the Air Boss's chief of staff for Admiral Buss. And the Air Boss, for the audience, is the head of all naval aviation, 3-star.
Not the usual Air Boss that we talk about on the carrier.
That's right.
Exactly.
Like I was an Air Boss, but not the Air Boss. There,
Right.
There's the Air Boss with the yellow jersey, and then the guy with the checkbook, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. So I didn't screw up too bad there, I guess. I made Admiral. I was selected for Admiral out of that job. And then the Air Boss sent me to be the Chief of Naval Air Training. So I went to Meridian, Mississippi, and the Chief of Naval Air Training is the command responsible for training all the Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and at the time about 25 other nations that hire the U.S. Navy to train some of their pilots. There's a wing in Corpus Christi where my headquarters was. There's a jet wing in Kingsville. There's a jet wing in Meridian, Mississippi. And then all the NFOs and the helicopter guys, and about 40% of that command is in Pensacola, Florida, to include the Blue Angels, were under that command. So really did that for a couple of years, just had a ball. And then the Navy rewarded me by sending me to another joint job. And it was a unique job, kind of a quiet job. We don't talk about it much, but it was part of an organization that developed terrorist networks. And then I had about 300 special forces dudes that once we developed the networks, they'd be forward, and then we'd go pick up the people in those networks and say hi to them.
Nice.
And then I decided that I'd had enough of joint jobs and retired and moved here to Houston with my wife.
Man, Dell, what a career, Snapper! I'll stay in character. When I met you, you were a RAG instructor, and then my wife and I knew you and your wife later and stuff. So I ended up calling him Dell most of my life, but I'll stay in character here and call you Snapper. Man, that's good. That was a long and varied career, but you covered it nicely. And I think the audience is going to enjoy hearing all the variety. People just don't know all that stuff that naval officers do that aviators do. Well, right. I want to get into the topic because I had to get myself oriented in terms of what was going on. So give us a little bit of a background on operations that we're going to talk about today around Kosovo, around 1999, and tell us, at this time, let's stick with the tactical orientation, military ops and stuff like that. And did the squadron and the air wing know you were going into combat? Did you train before that deployment?
So, all great questions. The answer was, I'll never forget the Slapshot Carter, the CEO at the time, saying, "Hey, my prediction is we're going to do a drive-by by Kosovo and have a little action, and then we're going to Iraq and open up a can on Saddam." And it turns out he was almost right. But we did more than a drive-by by Kosovo. We stayed there for a couple months and until Slobodan Milosevic capitulated, and then we took off and went through the canal and went to Iraq and started dropping bombs right there in Iraq too. So and we can talk about a little bit of that later about the different dynamic between Kosovo, AOR, area responsibility, and Iraq. But
yeah,
so we did a lot of CAS, or close air support. And the F-14 at the time did start a program, as both to train forward air controllers airborne.
right.
So that turned out to be tremendous. Our sister squadron was the Black Aces, VF-41, the squadron that I aforementioned I eventually was commanding officer of. And we both had these forward air controllers. So we did a lot of training in Fallon. We did a lot of training locally in and around Oceana and Virginia Beach with our forward air controllers to drop weapons. The key was the Lantern targeting pod that the F-14 had put on. Now, for the audience, and I am not a born and bred fighter guy because I was an attack guy first, right? So the F-14 was always capable of dropping bombs. It always had the software to drop bombs. But there wasn't a fighter guy in his right mind that ever wanted to admit that they were an attack guy and they dropped bombs. So in fact, if you remember the quantity dial in the back of the F-14, most fighter guys use that to count how many passes they were getting, practice passes during the fleet carrier landing practice. They didn't even know what that thing was for.
Yeah, I remember the attitude very well. That I was at Miramar for 10 years in the 1980s, right. And
yep. And of course, my dad would say that the mission of an air wing is strike, and fighter guys are nothing but support, right? So, but the fighter guys didn't want to hear any of that, and
no, it went back and forth.
Yeah. So when I went to VF-24, my first fleet squadron, they had never dropped a bomb. So the commanding officer at that particular squadron said, "Hey, Snapper, you've got experience of being an attack guy. Teach us how to drop bombs." And
it'd take like 30, 40 minutes, right?
Yeah. So I sat back and thought, well, how am I going to do this? So I basically took my old A6 air to ground SOP, standard operating procedure notebook, and I morphed it into the F-14. But what the F-14A didn't have, as both we called it the Commodore 64 computer on board the aircraft. It didn't calculate altitudes when you plugged in a waypoint, and you'd plug in an elevation to the waypoint, and it didn't have an underground radar. So it didn't calculate altitudes very, very specifically, or very close, very accurately, better said.
You had to input it, if I remember right, didn't you? Didn't you have to input the elevation?
You did.
Okay.
You did, to a target, to a waypoint, but it was the INS that would take that waypoint and without a whiteboard, if you have an elevation that is 20 feet off because your INS is drifting, then your target waypoint is either going to be long or short, depending on how off that is. So how did we in the A6 community, when we had errors in our system, although we had ways to update our system that the F-14 didn't, steeper is better, right? Because if you think about an airplane dropping a bomb 90 degrees straight down, it doesn't matter what the elevation of the target is, as long as you have the time of flight of the weapon to fuse the ordnance, it's going to hit the target. It doesn't matter how. So the steeper, the better, right? And I only tell that story because I get the F-14 guys around, and I'm briefing them on how to, kind of crawl before you run. But I said, as I explained the physics of this altitude issue in the aircraft, I said, hey, we can't go 90 degrees because the targeting book, our manual, only goes up to 60 degrees. So we're going to train to 60-degree dives in the F-14. And I said, you have to be so high to pull out from 60 degrees that we're only going to be able to really do that on targets that are quite large, right? Or you just can't see them. And this is before we had the lantern pod. So I mean, Rich Erie, one of my favorite people, whose dad was a fighter guy, and he's a fighter guy, and he's like, hey, so I listened to your brief. I'm going out to do a 60-degree dive, and it's just going to be, from a wagon wheel roll in. And he said, what's a gouge? I said, don't be a wimp when you roll in. You got to roll and pull and get right on your 60-degree wire. And I said, if you don't do that, Rich, you're going to float over the top, and you're going to find yourself standing on the rudder pedals going straight down, and that's not comfortable. And so he goes, yeah, whatever, I got it. So he gets back from his flight, and I go, hey, how'd it go? He goes, dude, I suck. I said, what do you mean? He goes, I did exactly what you told me not to do. I find myself going straight down 90 degrees toward the ground. And I said, well, he goes, yeah. I said, well, what'd you do? He goes, well, I dropped the bomb. I go, well, okay, that was illegal, but how was your hit? He goes, spot on, dude. He goes, your physics lecture is exactly right. I just verified it. So we had some amazing, scary events as I was trying to help those guys learn how to drop bombs. But it turned out great, and the quietly, and I'll say this quietly, the fighter guys like Slapshot Carter. He pulled me aside during Kosovo, and he said, hey, I'm never going to say this out loud, but this dropping bomb shit is a blast. So the fighter community started to turn, and frankly, the F-14, probably, you guys could back me up on this, probably would have gone away before it did if it wasn't for to embrace the air-to-ground mission and have that lantern pod strapped to the side of the jet. Which
no doubt. No doubt. Yeah, that's
amazing.
I think everybody agrees that's a true statement. And Snapper, just for perspective, I'm looking at our schedule of episodes, and the Lantern episode comes just before yours. So the audience is going to get a good background on how the pod came about.
Perfect.
Which is
perfect.
Yeah. So what about Kosovo now? Was it a hot war when you guys sailed, or obviously Slapshot knew something was going on?
Yeah. We knew that it was starting to heat up. The Air Force and the KAOK were already stood up in Vicenza, Italy, and we were going to head straight there. Matter of fact, I land, say goodbye to the wife and kids from Virginia Beach, get a couple traps with my pilot on the carrier. I get out of the jet. I walk to the PR shop, and DCAG walks in, the Deputy Airman Commander, Jack Godlewski at the time. He walks in and says, hey, Snapper, don't unpack, because in an hour, there's going to be a COD to fly you back to Virginia Beach. You've got a flight tomorrow to go up to New York and then fly to Israel with him and one other guy to brief Sixth Fleet, because his flagship was in Israel at the time, on how we're going to fight the Kosovo War. And I went, huh. So I said, yes, sir. And then immediately I ran down to the wardroom where.
And you're a lieutenant commander of the OPSO of the squadron.
correct. And a strike leader, and through, so I ran down to the wardroom where I found the skipper drinking a cup of coffee, and I said, "Hey, DKEG says I'm flying off the boat in about a half an hour, and I'm going to Israel, and then I'm going to go to the Kayak with him and start the Navy's effort in the Kayak up in Italy." And I said, "He can't do that. I mean, I'm a strike leader. I'm not that guy." And skipper stands up and he says, "I'll take care of this, Snapper." And he disappears for about 15 minutes, and he comes back and he goes, "Yeah, you're going to go pack your bags. You're gone." So, so that was an interesting evolution of briefing Sixth Fleet, and then
So who was Sixth Fleet at the time? Anybody that
it was?
If you remember,
Tuttle, I think.
Oh, okay.
He was a shoe, and didn't know anything about, like most surface warfare admirals at the time. Didn't know a lot about the striking power of an air wing. So we briefed him, and he at least pretended like he cared, and then we took off up to Italy, and we walked into the Air Operations Center, what we call the Kayak, and the Air Force said, "Okay, Navy guy, pick your call signs and pick your targets." And yeah, and so there's a big map on the wall.
Game on.
Yeah. And so, there's oil refineries and stuff that I thought would be cool to blow up. So they let me start picking targets, and then coordinating with the ship as the ship is pulling into the AOR. And we started going at it. It was initially from a strategic standpoint, right? What do we train to do? And found if there's a surface to air missile fired at us, and early on they were shooting a lot of SA-6s, SA-2s and 3s, but most of them were not necessarily guided. Some were, but most of them were not, and that comes into play here in a second. But what was happening was what we're taught when there's a SAM that comes up. We use some of the equipment on the aircraft to escape the missile, and then typically we'd go back to the ship and say, "Okay, we were shot at right here. Let's put a package together to go waste that weapon system." Well, the Serbs were smart, and we found out later they were being aided by the Iraqis. We'd been at war with Iraq for so long that they got pretty good at shooting a missile and then moving it. Maybe only moved it, 100 to 1,000 yards, just far enough to where we couldn't find it again. And they'd set it back up and shoot and move and set it back. So it was very, very frustrating because all they had to do is shoot one missile, and we'd leave to plan to go take them out, and they'd be gone, and they'd shoot from somewhere else. And it was this cat and mouse game for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Okay.
I spent about a week and a half at the Kayak, and then I flew back out to the ship, and I was replaced by a team of about seven dudes. DKEG and I came back. So the surface to air, the SAM problem, I'll call it, we had to change. We had to change our culture on how we fought, and finally we decided we can't leave, right? So when they shoot at us, we have to keep fighting, because what was happening was the Serbs were going into these towns in Kosovo, and they were ethnically cleansing people. They were just going in and murdering people. So our job was to try to protect those people as best we can and fight the Serbs.
Man.
Well, we ended up staying in the fight when they shot at us. We'd avoid, and I truly believe, I don't know if this is ever written down, I truly believe this is what happened. There was a whole bunch of us airborne, and we were doing some close air support, and they fired I think it was an SA-6 at us. In fact, it was at a 41 jet, and they worked their tails off to avoid the missile because it was guided. It was guiding on them. But there were so many of us, and we were so frustrated that instead of running away like we were taught to plan and go back and strike, every Air Force and Navy airplane in the northern hemisphere turned nose on and blew the living crap out of everything that supported that missile system. And that was a turning point. That was the last time they shot a missile at us, because I think they determined that someday this war is going to be over. And if the Americans are just going to waste every surface-to-air missile system that we have, we won't be able to protect ourselves from our borders. So that was essentially the end of the surface-to-air missile threat from the Serbs. So really interesting way of thinking.
So just one incident changed the course of it. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I'd never heard
yeah,
that. Crazy.
yeah. They may have fired something after that crunch, but nothing was ever guided. But they went into hiding.
Okay.
Okay.
Interesting. Wow. Because I remember that they had gotten really. So I was, while you guys were doing all that, we were on the other side of the Suez doing support for the other efforts at the time. And I remember we were intel junkies, and we'd read all the reports and we could see how they were moving things, and we'd lose track of them. And it looked like it was a really hard fight for you guys, for sure.
Well,
Yeah.
it was at times, but then it got to the point they were pretty good. They were pretty good at decoys.
That's right.
They had blow up tanks and smudge pots to make the tanks look through our lantern that it was an actual heat signature. And I'll never forget. One of the intel guys came back after one of my missions, and he said, "Hey, Snapper, don't get mad at me." He said, "But I think maybe one of those tanks he blew up was a decoy." And I go, "Okay. So that's just one less decoy they have. Let's just blow them all up."
That's right.
And we did, and then we started running out of ammunition. So the ammunition ships are coming. I think I'm gonna estimate here. I think the most junior guy in our squadron, just in Kosovo, dropped around 30 laser guided bombs.
Wow.
And that was a junior guy. The rest of us,
a lot of action.
It was absolutely fantastic. In fact, the forward air controllers. We couldn't drop 500-pound bombs anymore because we saved all those for the forward air controllers to use as marks.
Uh-huh.
So it was just bizarre. We would load two 2,000-pound laser guided bombs on the F-14 because we were running out of the 1,000-pound variants, which I like. We put 4 of those on the Tomcat. The thing that was unique about this war is it was an all-air war, and historians will debate on how what caused Milosevic to capitulate. But the fact was it made our rules of engagement really easy, relatively speaking.
Go ahead, explain that implication.
So rules of engagement, we had NATO rules of engagement we had to satisfy, and we had U.S. rules of engagement. Unlike Afghanistan, where you'd have an international rules of engagement, maybe you had the UK rules of engagement, U.S. rules of engagement. As I recall, at any one time that I flew in Afghanistan, we have 3 or 4 different sets of rules of engagement that you had to satisfy before you hit the pickle button and dropped a weapon. In Kosovo, it got to the point, and I'm not necessarily advocating this, but it got to the point to where you'd look down and you'd see a gathering of some people or some jeeps or whatever. We called them assembly areas. And you'd call back to the KAOC and report it. And they, in less than 60 seconds, they'd go, "Okay, drop on." That was the rules of engagement that we had to satisfy. It was
because there were no friendlies down there.
Exactly. And what they were doing to these people, these innocent people, it was absolutely horrific. it was hard not to be emotional about it. I remember Slammer told me, "Hey, it's just a job." He was being interviewed. It's something that, we're just doing our job, which was true right up until the time you watched the BBC and you saw what they were doing to these kids, and it was just horrible. So there was some emotion to this whole conflict. Now, um, there were 19 at the time. NATO had 19 nations in it, and target sets started to dwindle rapidly because it only took one nation within that 19 nations to say no to a target. And there was one particular nation, I won't say which one it was, but it would surprise you, that said no a lot. So we ran out of targets, with the exception of, trying to hunt down the bad guys.
Do you have any reason? I mean, can you give any justification? Like, did maybe they have business connections or something like that? Okay.
Yep. And it was another European country.
Yeah. I mean, all right. That's reality.
But what we did, I'll tell kind of a quick story on, we always had a backup target. The KAC would say, "Hey, you guys can go drop on this target if you can't find the trucks, or you can't find the tanks you're looking for, whatever." One time they gave us a backup target of a nickel plant, and it was massive. It was silos everywhere, big, huge buildings, elevators running all over the place. And it just looked like it was so much fun to blow up that we were hoping we couldn't find our primary target. So after about 3 days, the General Short, who was in charge of the KAC, sent a message out to the aircraft carrier and said, "All right, stop bombing the effing nickel plant. Would you guys leave it alone?" Yeah. So yeah, it was really, really interesting. I think too, and as you look back in 1999, President Clinton, Madeleine Albright was advocating for this conflict, and there were those that said, "We're not going to put troops on the ground. You can't win an air war. You can't win a war from the air." So as you might remember, this whole thing was very politically charged.
Oh yeah.
We finally, I think one of the things that actually caused Milosevic to capitulate, and again, these are my feelings, not necessarily official.
Sure.
Is we started using the B-52 and dropping a lot of bombs with the B-52, and I think that put him over the edge to say, "Okay, whoa, this is now they're really just going to pull out some stops that they didn't think we were going to do."
So roughly what month and year did you get there? Because you mentioned the B-52s, and tell us what other U.S. forces. I mean, who else from the USA was there?
It was fall of '99 when we got there.
Fall of '99. Okay.
And I recall, I mean, as I said earlier, the Air Force had already started operations.
And what did they have there? F-16s, I guess.
F-15s, F-16s. They did have eventually. They brought in, I believe, towards the end with the B-52s, they brought in B-1s, which was that was a pretty new airplane, or pretty.
Yeah, and in '99, that was still probably a nuke bomber.
Yeah, but they weren't using it, right? So
right.
they wanted to at least show that they used it.
How about the A-10?
The A-10 was there and did an absolutely wonderful job.
Sure.
We would work with the A-10 guys in the FAC role. It was absolutely wonderful. We did strikes. We did one strike. In fact, it was my first mission when I got back from the CAP, was Slammer. And
who? With who?
Slammer Richardson.
Never heard of him.
Yeah, that guy.
Sorry, Slammer.
Yeah. So we get and Slammer. I'll say Slammer one of the greatest fighter guys that ever lived, but he sucked as an attack pilot. Anyway, um,
all right, we're going to have to get Slammer on for a rebuttal, I think.
So Slammer and I, we were going against actually a target in another country outside of Serbia, and I probably shouldn't mention it. It took a long time for us to get permission to do it. But what the Serbs were doing is flying their Super Galebs, which were an attack airplane, out of this country, knowing that we wouldn't mess with them. And they were dropping bombs on these villages and killing innocent people in the villages. And then they'd go across the border and we couldn't do anything about it. And frankly, at this time, maybe we had a Sparrow on board. We weren't carrying Phoenix. No need to carry Phoenix against these guys. So a Sparrow just for self-protect, or maybe a Sidewinder or two. So we finally got permission to go take out this airfield where the Galebs were launching out of. And it was my first mission, like I said, come back from the KAOC, and we're launching every airplane that's up. And for the audience, every airplane that either in the hangar or the flight that's flyable, we're going at it. And right behind us is going to be a U.S. only strike.
You mean on this one specific mission?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And right behind us is going to be a wave of a U.S. only strike. And when we say U.S. only, that's all Air Force and some of the special Air Force planes, like the B-1 and others. And then there would be a NATO wave. So we're the first ones in, and you can imagine, audience, the loudest thing in the world is on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier with every airplane turning and getting ready to launch. And I'm leading my element with Slammer, my division, which is 4 airplanes, and I'm going through the systems, getting the communications right, and the classified communications, and the weapon systems and bombs, making sure everything is talking to each other. And Slammer says to me, "Hey, Snapper, look at this." And at the time, I'm a little bit busy. He's just got to start the motors. Now he's waiting for the guy in the back to do the rest of it. And so I go, "What?" And so we're a couple hundred miles out to sea on the loudest environment you can imagine. And there's a white dove sitting on the nose of our F-14. And I'm a God-fearing man, Christian. I believe I know what a white dove means. And so Slammer's like, "What do you make of that?" And I go, "Well, it either means something really, really good or really, really bad." And so we're staring at this white dove a couple hundred miles out to sea. And about that time, it takes off and flies right next to the Black Ace F-14 right next to it, gets sucked down the intake and blown out the backside. And I said to Slammer, I go, that's not a good sign. So God does have a sense of humor. We've made it back and we hit our target. But it was.
But he made you think, so that's good.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it was on my toes.
Oh God, that's funny.
Yeah.
Wow.
But that strike took care of that particular airfield, and that stopped the cleansing from the skies.
Well, somebody got some kills. Was that in the Kosovo or was that earlier? Because obviously,
that was earlier.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now, so one thing. So we were talking about the FAC-A mission, Forward Air Controller Airborne mission. Now, were you personally a FAC-A?
No,
you were not.
Well, no. So I've never told anybody this story because it's a bit dishonest. But we had rules that when we went in to drop bombs, SCAR missions, if you will, you had to have a wingman. And I launched, and being a former RAG instructor, a lot of times when I wasn't leading a strike, I would fly with the new guys. And so I'm flying with a Cat 1, a new guy, great kid, and our VF-41 jet that was supposed to be our wingman went down on the flight deck, and we already launched. So the rules are the only way you can go in as a single airplane into Kosovo was you had to be a forward air controller. And so I'm circling and outside of the border, waiting for somebody to pick us up so we can go in and drop our 4 bombs. And I'm friends with the VF-41 forward air controller, who's just about 30 miles away. They found a whole bunch of tanks, and he's calling all these guys in to drop bombs on these tanks. And here we sit 30 miles away. I can hear it on the radio, and I'm not happy because we've got 4 bombs that need a home, and I can't fit. There's nobody. They're not letting me in. So finally, I figure I've got about 15 minutes of gas left to fight with. And I come up to the controller and I say, hey, we really need to get in. And they said, sir, the only way you can go in as a single is if you're a forward air controller. And I said, well, good, because I'm a forward air controller. So I figured I was because as an A6 guy, I figured I knew more than anyway. So I'll never forget my pilot looking in the rearview mirror going, what? And got on the back radio to the forward air controller, the actual forward air controller, 30 miles away, Brian Brurud, and I said, Bruce Snapper on his tactical frequency. I said, Bruce Snapper, I got about 15 minutes left, and I've got 4 bombs that need a home. And he gave me the coordinates to the center of the area where the tanks were, and he cleared everybody else out, and we did 4 quick bombing runs from each cardinal heading. And in 5 minutes, all 4 bombs were off, and they found a home. It was absolutely awesome. And
amazing.
And, yeah,
that's amazing. Yeah. Well, I think the statute of limitations on impersonating a FAC A is expired, exactly. So you're safe.
Yeah. It was fun.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so obviously, you kind of touched on it a little bit. You talk about Brew being out there doing the FAC A mission. So when it comes to the air wing, the air wing gets out there. We got the air wing, we got the Air Force, we got all of NATO. Everybody's coming in there. How much did that FAC A role play in the overall mission of Kosovo? How did that affect the war?
Well, I will say it was absolutely critical, because when the stationary targets went away very, very early on, and like I said, it was hard to get the target list expanded through NATO. It was seeking out and trying to find the tanks and the trucks and the soldiers, and that was all due through FAC A's. It was if we didn't have them, we would have figured something out, but it wouldn't have been as effective without the FAC A's. And so I don't forget, as we talk about the Lantern Pod, it's important to understand the F-18 had what they called a T-flare, and it was absolutely horrible. It didn't compare to the Lantern Pod. And I felt really bad about the Hornet guys. And in fact, it was so bad that the KAOC, unless you had a certain type of pod, quality of pod, a 4th generation pod, they would not let you drop bombs with that pod. So the Hornet guys, we had 2 Hornet squadrons, legacy Hornet squadrons in the air wing at the time. If you were ever to say these words out loud, then somebody would probably tell you to go take a urinalysis. But we used the Hornets as bomb trucks, if you can believe that, because they couldn't drop bombs with their pod, so they'd fly up next to us. We'd find the targets with Lantern and stand by pickle, and then we would guide their bombs for them. And I will put a plug in for the Hornet guys on that ship. Instead of being like this and having their head down and not maybe being as
helpful,
yeah, and being very parochial, they were awesome. They realized what their role was. It wasn't our fault that we flew this old F-14 but we had this amazing pod, and we had a lot of gas. And the F-14, I'll go back to my attack routes. The F-14 is incredibly stable, which makes it a wonderful airplane to drop ordnance on. Bombs out of that tunnel, it was amazing. So my time, a little over 10 years flying the F-14 was, I got back from that cruise, and you both obviously know what it's like on a fly-in when you haven't seen your spouse for forever, and you come back from a war cruise, and there's your wife and kids. And my wife looked at me and she said, "So really, how was it?" And I said, "I'm done. I don't need to do anything else in the Navy anymore. I'm done." It was we got to do what we were trained to do, and we did it very well. And the people that we got to work with, and it was absolutely fantastic. So,
man, that is quite a comment, Snapper.
That is. So, where were we going with that? We were talking about FAC A and how important. Oh, the bomb truck. I know what it was. So, just so for everybody who knows, when it comes to like the buddy bombing thing, so Snapper, you might be in your Tomcat. You got your lantern pod on there. As long as you got the combat laser dialed in ahead of time, you can change your laser code to anything, right? And so now I fly up next to you in my Hornet, and we just basically get on the same float. I just basically fly formation on you and say, "Hey, my laser code is 1688. You plug in 1688, put a laser spot down, and you just tell me when to pickle." And based off of aerodynamics, my bomb comes off, gets a good initial vector towards that target. You put the laser on, and bang, my bomb, which is hard coded on the flight deck to whatever that laser code is. You change your pod to put out the right pulse repetition frequency on that laser so that it sees it and goes in and hits the target. Just for the folks who don't know how a laser pod works. Because
another thing to remember is when is with a laser guided bomb, you got a few seconds where the bomb can adjust. I mean, there's an optimum release point, but you do have a few seconds. It's not a spot. I mean, that's my
you're talking my language, and I'm getting all fired up now as we're talking about bombs.
Well, that's about all I know. So.
Well, you would, and for the crowd, we would do something called a delay laze, right? So you drop the bomb and you let the bomb fly ballistically without guiding it, because as soon as you turn the laser on and the seeker of that bomb finds the laser spot, and keep in mind the laser spot, it's not necessarily like a flashlight. It's jittering all around in this area where you're pointing the FLIR, and you would wait till your target system, the lantern pod, would tell you time to impact. And once your time to impact got to 10 seconds, then you'd turn the laser on, and that meant the bomb had enough smack on it, or as much smack as possible, because you haven't been driving it around. And a lot of times, if you turn the laser on too early, once it starts making its corrections, it's losing energy. The bomb will fall short, and you never wanted the bomb, obviously, to fall short. So our rule of thumb was, if the delivery is perfect, then you delay laze. Or if the target starts moving, then we start lazing it immediately. Or, which we did in Kosovo many times, and we did it in Iraq on the same cruise. Sometimes you drop the bomb and you're looking through your FLIR, and you as the bomb is flying, before you turn your laser on, maybe a more juicy target came up that's close to the one you were aiming at. So at that point, you're changing your mind and you start lazing. Laze where you think the bomb's looking, and then you drag the bomb over to the target. So it follows. So it really, we dropped so many bombs. It was really amazing to see what the maneuverability of a Paveway 2 kit could do. I saw some bombs that cross-range travel just look like there's not a chance in the world that we're going to make this happen. And it's a great cheap weapon.
And some that I can say from my limited experience with the lantern was a maneuver, a move like that, like adjusting the target, that was easy to do. I mean, that was a well-designed system. The hand control was great, even though it was your left hand. Yeah. Well, that's pretty
Yeah,
cool though, to have the presence of mind to think about all that stuff.
I loved it. And as you guys know, when the Super Hornet was developed, they developed it with the AT FLIR in mind. And us old F-14 guys that started flying the Super Hornet went, this is a piece of garbage compared to the Lantern Pod.
Mm-hmm.
And Lantern Pod was way less expensive. So that's that gets people riled up a little bit when we talk about the AT FLIR. So we won't talk about the AT FLIR.
You're skipping all the way to the bottom question that says compare and contrast. Well, hey, but get back in the Wayback Machine to Kosovo. So we're talking about Paveway 2. So GBU 10, GBU 12, GBU 16. Thank you. I'm sitting there going, wait a minute, what is it? Did you drop any GBU 24s?
So I'm glad you brought that up. That's a great question, and I wanted to talk about it a little bit. GBU 24 for the audience is a 2,000-pound penetrator weapon, and it's massive. When the fins unfold on this weapon, they reach out to about 11 feet, wingtip to wingtip.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you can program the fuse, you can program the flight path of the thing. Really cool weapon, especially if you have the software to deliver the weapon and take its capabilities into consideration. So we didn't in the F-14. The Air Force didn't either, specifically for the GBU-24 because it was new. And Slobodan Milosevic, if I recall, had about 11 palaces, and all of them had underground, bunkers for him to be safe in. And so we were coming up with ways to reach down and touch him. So what we had to do is kind of jury rig the software, if you will, or read the Lantern data differently, which was outside of our habit pattern to drop the GBU-24. And the Air Force and the Navy dropped enough GBU-24s unsuccessfully that there was a lot of pressure to figure this out because they were pretty expensive and there wasn't a ton of them. So I'll go back to this is actually a strike. I hadn't dropped one personally in Kosovo, but that same cruise when we went to Iraq. Can I talk about this since GBU-24 related? But
oh yeah,
Iraq.
Absolutely.
We went to Iraq and we dropped so many bombs that the KAOC in Iraq area, Middle East and Bahrain, they said, "Hey, these guys have so much experience. Let's teach Saddam a lesson." And we started dropping bombs right away in Iraq. And it's like we never left Kosovo. It's just a different kind of terrain.
It's a little more brown, less green, right?
Exactly. And we're in Bahrain at dinner, and there's about 30 of us, and the ship's pulling out the next day, and I catch a ride back with DCAG instead of taking a cab, and it's about 2000. We didn't have to be back on the boat till midnight, and I'd had plenty to drink, and I didn't want to feel crappy the next day. So I get back on the boat and I stop by the duty officer and say, "Hey, I'm on board. I'm going to hit the rack." And they said, "Oh, no, XO's waiting for you." Again, slammer, waiting for you in Civic, because day after tomorrow at a 0400 launch, you guys are leading a strike to a certain area in Iraq. And it's going to have, again, waves of airplanes, and every airplane we have. And I kind of look at him and I laugh and I go back, and because I think he's just screwing with me. So I literally get into bed and I lay there and I go, what if he's not? And so I put my flight suit on and I sneak down to Civic, So if he was screwing with me, nobody saw that he got me. And I stick my head in there, and there's only one guy in there, and it's Slammer. And he's got charts all over the table. And he goes, "Oh, hey, bub, start picking targets. We've got a mission to lead." And so I looked at the target set, and I said, "Okay, we're going to drop GB-24 on this target, and we'll give the skipper Slapshot. We'll give he and Scooter Moyer the other GB-24, and then I chose, because we had Lantern, I chose the very real small targets for my F-14 brothers, and the large building type targets I would give to the Hornets because they could find the large buildings on their FLIR. And so we're longer story shorter. Like I said, it's a 4:00 in the morning launch, and every plane on the flight deck's turning. And I go to make sure that the GBU-24 has the right settings, fuse settings and flight path settings. Well, there's 4 modes on the GBU-24.
Ooh. Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
Yeah. Well, what I'd never seen is there's a different version of GBU-24 that had 8 positions on it. And I knew I had to drop in mode 2, but now there's 8 settings. So does that mean mode 6 or mode 2? I had no idea. So Slammer looks at me, and it's hot, dark, and he goes, and I'm perplexed. And all the planes are turning. Well, Dan Cave, my roommate, slave boy, was the GBU-24 SME. And he's parked on the back of the ship. I'm parked up on the forward part of the ship. And I start running down the flight deck. I tell Slammer, I said, just get in the jet. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. I didn't want him to be stressed because we're leading this whole thing, and I don't know what setting to put on my bomb. So I run down. I find Slave Boy. I was flying with CJ Denny at the time. I gave them a really hard target. And they're sitting in their jet, both engines running. And you guys appreciate this. I was so stressed. I just dropped the ladder right in front of the intake of the motor that was running, and I climbed up and I stuck my face in front of Slave Boy, and I go, mode 2 or mode 6? What is it? There's 8 modes or 8 switch positions. Where did that come from? I never heard of such a thing. And Slave Boy looks at me and he goes, "Funny, Slapshot just asked me the same thing," because he had the other 24 and he was parked across from him. He goes, "I'm pretty sure it's mode 2. I'm like, "You gotta be kidding." So I think my career's over, and I run back. I make sure it's mode 2. We get in the jet, we launch. Sun's coming up, and we're going towards the target, and I'm going to designate, and the target won't designate. And I can see the target from 30 miles away, and I can't get the right symbology to come up in the lantern saying that I'm designated, and I've got to drop this thing 0.1 plus or minus 0.1 of a mile.
Oh, so this was a pinpoint release. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the mode 2 and the way the bomb flies, it's a continuous lays for that mode. So I am in the skipper and Scooter are on our wing, and the plan is I'm going to go standby pickle, boom, and both bombs come off, and I gave them a little bit different aim point than I had, but I can't get this thing going. I can't. It's not working. I'm absolutely stressing, and I started doing what we do in the A6. If you can't think of anything else, just start hitting it. So I'm pounding on that hand controller. Slammer is looking at the rearview mirrors, and bless his heart, he knew that he shouldn't ask any questions. He sees me going nuts in the back, and instead of going, "Hey, tell me what's going on, Snapper," but he just kept his mouth shut and he flew the jet. And I didn't even look at the range. I knew I had about one last time to try. I pulled the trigger on the hand controller, and the symbology came up, and I looked down at the distance, and I was 0.6 miles. We're doing 500 knots. It's 0.6 miles from drop, and so I just looked up, and I said, I didn't even have enough air in my lungs to say pickle. I just kind of threw out pickle. I didn't say standby pickle. I didn't tell my wingman to pickle. I just said pickle the slammer, and he pickled the bomb off. And Scooter, who's flying for him, sees this gigantic bomb come off, and the fins open up. And so he didn't wait. He just hit pickle on his bomb. So there's about a second delay now in the bombs. So both bombs are flying towards this. It was a command bunker, massive command bunker. And my bomb, I was aiming right for the center of the building, and I had Slapshot go at a vent that was on the corner of the roof. Well, because of that 1 second delay, when my bomb went in and exploded, it lifted up the roof, and 1 second delay, Slapshot's bomb went right in, and the roof settled back down, so his bomb went in unabated. And so the KAOC folks, when they saw the film, they go, these guys are the most unbelievable weaponeer people. Can you see who in the world could do that? Complete luck. And
that's what we do, man.
Yeah, exactly. So, but those two GBU-24s work crunch. They work absolutely perfect. And we ended up getting pretty good at dropping GBU-24s, but man, it was a rough road.
Yeah.
Crunch, I'm going to say that covers what was your most memorable mission.
We've done like 3 of those.
Snapper, it's interesting because I'm thinking back to the Tomcat Rios and pilots we've talked to, and guys that talk about either system failures, on the way in or other, and they're just back there just pushing buttons and hitting things like you said. I mean, in your case, it was probably some contrast deal or something because it was a lantern wouldn't pop up. Anyway, but I mean that just happens in combat flights.
Well, you guys know about mass curves, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't going to bring it up and explain it, but
masking, yeah.
The mass curve wouldn't show up when I designated, which I knew the bomb wouldn't come off if I didn't have a mass curve. So that was the issue.
So for the audience, that's a mask MASK curve, and it says where you've got to keep the aim point as the plane maneuvers in order to make sure the laser still shows at the target. See, Skippy taught me a few things in 211. So
nice.
Yep.
All right. So moving on. So all right. So Bio had a great question here that he scribbled down, which is, how did the squadron and the air wing handle lessons learned? Because you had you talked about a lot of it just now about how you made progress. This happened, then you changed. Obviously, there's some lessons learned here, and not only for the KAOC and for other ships, but just internally. How did you guys do that? Were there daily hot washes?
Yes. We would, yes, absolutely. We would get together, and I learned this from, you guys probably remember Vice Admiral Dave Nichols, who's my first CO in 196, and aside from my father, was the greatest tactician I've ever known in the Navy. We would have a hot wash.
He was an A6BN, right?
Correct.
I think I cruised with him when I was on my first cruise or second cruise. But I remember him. Yeah.
Absolutely amazing warrior. We would typically have the OPSO, myself, or the maintenance officer say, okay, event 1. How was the airplane? What was the mission? What did you learn from the mission? What did you do good? What did you do poorly? We did that right before Desert Storm, before we were supposed to go into Desert Storm. And I was a brand new guy out of the A6 rag. We did that every night in my A6 squadron. And that daily debrief, and listening to the air crew handle maintenance failures or equipment failures or mistakes they made, and we had a culture where you could admit your mistakes, and the boss wouldn't come down on you, right?
Right.
So the speed of which you learn, right, is accelerated immensely if you can have that type of a culture within a squadron. So Crunch, we did a lot of that, with not only within the squadrons but within the air wing. But what's really important is how are we going to help NSOC, Nautic, back then in the day, Strike University, understand what was new, right? Because as I said earlier, they'd shoot a SAM at us, and we'd go away. We'd avoid it, go away, and figure out how to come back and destroy it later. Well, that tactic was not sound, right? For the conflict we were in. So it was really important that we took great notes, organized them appropriately, so we could go back and help the schoolhouse understand what we were faced with, what we did right, what we didn't do so good, and what we learned from it. So then that could be passed on to follow on air wings before they would deploy. And the whole forward air controller system, as you guys know, we started doing that a lot more at Fallon in the 5 or 6 week Air Wing Fallon training. So it's a great question, and you're right, Crunch. It is absolutely critical that you not only capture those lessons learned, but put them in a some sort of database or system that is easy to get to, and then it's easy to update and add to. Otherwise, as we all know, people won't look at it, and we'll have to relearn lessons. And
well, you know what they say: the first lesson in lessons learned is always read the lessons learned. Right.
Right.
Because that's the hardest thing to do, is to actually go back and go, oh, well, Snapper's done this before. I probably should take a look at what he did wrong so I don't repeat it. And if we don't do that, and that's called learning. Right. That's great stuff. Yep. Well, hey, you also earlier you were talking about the F-18F, and you kind of you started to go there and then you stopped. I would love it. I think the audience would love it if we revisited that just for a little quick conversation, just to compare and contrast.
Well, be sure to include some pros and cons. There's got to be some good things.
Yeah.
Go for
it. I love the F-18 Super Hornet, particularly obviously the 2-seat. Although my son flies the single-seat Super Hornet because he doesn't think he needs his old man anymore. And I love technology. So here's what the Super Hornet does. It does so many things well that we kind of felt when we were flying it that we were voting members, not necessarily a pilot and a whistle, right? Because it's so automated and technology is tremendous in it. When people ask, what do you like better flying? It's apples and oranges between the F-14 and the F. And here's what I mean by that. When I was going through F-14 training, I would watch pilots fight over the Wizzo, Rio in this case, who they were going to fly with. Because you had to know the system, you had to know how to fix it, you had to know what circuit breakers to pull in at one time and how to push them back in. You had to know when to call it quits. You had to know how to jury rig it. You just had to know. If you were a great troubleshooter, then the pilot was going to get his flight hours, and the pilot more times than not was going to win. The F makes anybody who sits in the back of that thing average, right? You can take below average people that weren't very good in the F-14, and they'd be fine in a Super Hornet. It's harder to be amazing, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, because there's less technique, less finesse. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah,
which in the grand scheme is actually a good thing. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah,
sure.
I agree. It is a good thing overall.
But that reminds me of the early days of the Tomcat community. When I was a JO in the early 80s, people were talking about pulse search over land. That was a badge of a good Rio.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then later on in Crunch, we've talked about this, Top Gun, especially with the D, but even later with the A, I think they're saying, just stick with track wall scan,
Yeah. It's a great point. When the D that had a much more advanced radar than the A and the B.
Yeah.
I'd sit back and go, well, this is just easy, right? Compared to, they're going into the beam, they're shooting out some chaff, we're going to pulse, and we're, like you said, it was an art, and you had to work really, really hard to be really good at it, and you just don't have to do that so much in the F. And I agree, Crunch. It is a good thing.
Yeah.
Okay. How about range on the Super Hornet and stuff like that? I don't have any Super Hornet experience, and I
Yeah.
only
So
deployed with Legacy Hornets.
yeah. So it's very equivalent to the A6 with a single center line. So it carried a lot more fuel and a lot more weapons than the Legacy Hornet. It's the airplane they should have built initially.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
That's that's an interesting statement.
And now, there's advancements they're really looking at by putting EP motors in it, which gives it about 22% more thrust, and it can use that and be more fuel efficient. Boeing's got the capability to put conformal tanks, much like the F-16 has.
Ooh. Yeah, I know. For a while I heard the Navy was getting. Well, we don't want to go down that road. But anyway.
Yeah. Conformal tanks would be cool. I mean, I've seen those in Strike Eagles. I've never seen them anywhere else.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah,
they're on the back amazing. They're on the back of the Super Hornet.
Yes, exactly.
Yep. I did not know that. Learn something every day. There's my thing.
There's those of us who flew the F-14 remember the Erst, right? So, Erst is an infrared search tracker. I think it stands for, right? And it was right below the nose of the F-14D, and the B. Didn't the B?
No, just the B.
CS. So what we did is we developed the center line. We put an Erst that is remarkably like the F-14s in the nose of the center line, drop tank. You lose about 350 pounds of gas.
I like the Erst. I always find.
I know.
I love.
Yeah, but we don't want to go into certain strengths and stuff like that. I don't think.
But what's amazing? It's 1970s technology, and it's used today.
Once again, when I was a new guy, the early Tomcats had an IR on the nose, but by the time I got to the fleet in '81, it was gone because guys said it didn't work right. So, and then there were the F8. F8 Crusader had an IR. I don't know if it was good or not. The F106 had an IR. So, yes, it is 60s technology.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm an old guy.
That's awesome.
Crunch, should we I think we covered our mission here.
Yes, sir. I think we have. But
Snapper, can you tell us what you're doing nowadays? Besides besides your 4 children, I'm sure that keeps you busy.
Yep. Well, and 7 grandchildren
already
too.
Wow.
Yeah. So, when people get out of the military, especially naval aviation, most everybody says, "What do you miss?" Well, I miss the people, right? I don't miss the people because I'm working for a company. I'm the vice president of the Americas for a company called CAVU, and we know what CAVU stands for in the Navy. It's Ceiling Visibility Unlimited. And President Bush said to our CEO, because Dave Burnham is the CEO, you guys know, another F-14 guy, lived down the street from the Bushes in Kennebunkport. And longer story shorter, President Bush found out that the Burnham kid was a fighter pilot like he was, and was going out to be XO of an aircraft carrier, and invited Dave to talk to him. And he had this plaque on the wall, Bush Senior, and it said CAVU. And he said to Dave, "Do you know what that means?" And Dave said, "Yes, sir. Ceiling Visibility Unlimited." And the president said, "That's right." He said, "It's the perfect day to fly." So what our company does is we look at teams that we work for and try to create that perfect day for them and make it repeatable. So we're mostly leadership and safety training for oil and gas companies, law enforcement. We work at several ports in process improvement and safety and leadership training, as well as medical and construction. And just most recently, we're working now on our third chemical plant with our coaches. There's about 60 of us, and we have the capability to speak 14 different languages all around the world. We're stationed, and we're mostly fighter pilots and Navy SEALs, Blue Angels, Top Gun graduates, and we use nuclear engineers, and we use those tools and those tenets that that made those teams so successful, and we apply those tools to industry, and it's really fun working with those people. Like I said, I don't miss the people in the Navy because I'm still with them, and it's a lot of fun, great, challenging, and certainly it's an honor to continue to serve our law enforcement and our oil and gas industry folks, and make sure they can get home with all their fingers and toes back to their family.
I mean, that's what makes our society what it is.
Yeah,
What you guys,
that's great.
our support. Yep.
Great stuff.
Well, cool. Thanks.
And anytime you guys are in Houston, doors always open.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Next time I'm there, I'm calling you.
Excellent.
I love
Excellent.
it. All right. Well, I think that wraps up the show. Bio, do you have anything else you want to talk about?
No, I mean, I learned a lot. I got to confess, just due to my personal transition and stuff, I missed a lot of the details that you talked about today, because it was when I was getting out of the Navy and stuff like that. And so you filled in my personal knowledge base, but I think our audience also is going to get a lot of insight and a lot of enjoyment out of hearing your stories about not only naval aviation, but about how the F-14 shined when it was put to the test. So, Snapper, thanks.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
There's no substitute. You didn't ask me about the A6 and the A6 against the F-14, but there was no substitute to plugging in the afterburners to get out of a target area instead of having to dive for the deck like you did in the A6. So, yeah, the F-14, awesome airplane.
Okay, there you go. That's awesome. A good finish right there.
Awesome. Well, thank you, sir. Appreciate your time, and thanks for joining us here on the F-14 Tomcast. It's been a real pleasure.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
You've been listening to the F-14 Tomcast, part of the Air Combat Experience, brought to you by BVR Productions. Got a question for the show? Send an email to questions@f14tomcast.com or leave a message on our listener line at 877 Mach 101 extension 3. That's 877-622-4101 extension 3. For updates on this podcast and our other military aviation themed shows, visit bvrpro.com and follow the Air Combat Experience on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Thanks for listening.